Welcome back to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. A historian first, a Republican second. Daniel Ostrander is a retired history professor at Butte College in Southern California and author. He has written books with several presidents, including George H.W. Bush, entitled Read My Lips, No New Taxes. Now, you've written about Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon. You've compared the Louisiana Purchase by Thomas Jefferson to President Bush's famous no new taxes statement. And you characterize these decisions as great acts of leadership. But when you wanted to write President Bush's book, he didn't make it easy for you, did he?
Well, it started out when I teach. I teach through historical parallels. And so I just don't want to go through and talk about, what started my relationship with George Bush was my lecture on Thomas Jefferson and Louisiana Purchase. I showed what a great act of leadership that was on Thomas Jefferson's part, how he violated every principle because he was a strict interpretationist of the Constitution, and yet he stepped outside himself and he purchased that territory, which was a huge achievement for the United States. And I used George H.W. Bush as a historical parallel when I gave that lecture. I pointed out how Bush violated his personal political philosophy, stepped outside himself, and it was a great act of leadership, and he knew it was the right thing to do for the country.
And he knows that's why he lost the election.
And that's why he lost the election, so it was very painful for him. And when I called up, I didn't know Bush. I called his office to find out if he was going to write his memoirs. And Rose was his chief of staff at the time. And she said, no, he doesn't like to write. And I said, that's too bad, because Read My Lips was a great act of leadership, and some historian needs to talk about this issue so that the American people can understand it. And because he was catching a lot of criticism for it. And I explained to her my historical parallel between Thomas Jefferson and President George H.W. Bush. And she said, would you do me a favor? I go, yeah. She says, would you write that up in a letter to President Bush, and I'll see that he gets it? I said, sure. So I did. Next thing I know, I get a phone call. No, I got a letter first. And President Bush said, thank you, but no thank you. And so I was on the President's Council of Richard Nixon's library, and he was having a conference back in Washington, D.C. And Brent Scowcroft was a good friend of Bush's, and he also worked in the Ford administration. And I did a book with Ford that Scowcroft just thought was super. It was on the War Powers Resolution. And so when I saw him back in Washington, he told me again how good he thought the book was. And I said, well, I was trying to do the same thing with Bush Sr. And he says, will you write him again and you copy me? So I did. Next thing I know, I got a call from Bush Sr. and he said he would do another book with me. He would do a book with me, but he didn't want to do that topic. And I told him this topic is very important, not for you, because he says mom told him not to be braggadocious and everything, but this is important for the country, so they understand this principle of political pragmatism, of a president having to step outside himself, his values and his party values, and do what is best for the country. And so he made me write a one-page summary, so I did. And then he agreed. He also talked to President Ford before he agreed. And President Ford gave me an A+ rating because I'd done a book with Ford, and then Ford had also come up to Butte College and put on a workshop for me for teachers from 10 different counties. And so Ford and I became good friends. And so anyway, and Scowcroft was a key go-between because he was close to Ford and close to Bush. So anyway, that got my foot into the door, and then Bush didn't like to write, so he told me I was going to be his ghostwriter, and I'd write the book and he'd write the foreword.
Okay.
So after my wife and I sketched out the book and everything, and we talked to him, and then we went back to discuss the final drafts and everything like that. He says, I just can't say these things about myself. He says, my mom told me not to be braggadocious.
Uh,
We're going to trade spots. I'm going to write the foreword, and this is going to be your book. So that's what we did.
when did you complete this book?
The book I did with Ford was a limited edition book on the War Powers Resolution. It's like 200 copies, and he signed every single one of them. And then we sold them to people and gave the money to the Butte College Foundation for student scholarships.
Okay.
And so I wanted to do the same thing with Bush, except they were going to go to people who donated money for the opening of his library.
Okay.
And so they said, well, we'll give them the people who donated $200,000 a year or more. I thought you got more than 200 people. I mean, that did that, and so forth. So anyway, that's how the book started out. It was a limited signed edition, and then people encouraged me to get it published, and I should have gone to Bush's publisher and had them publish a trade edition because there were no trade editions.
Okay.
So then I tried to go to a publisher, and they said, well, it's already been printed once in that limited edition book, so we don't print second editions.
So I'm curious, how did you wind up with Page?
Well, I did a lot of research on publishers because I had published before, and and I learned a lot about publishing just going through. I'm not sure how I ended up getting their name. I guess maybe that I had a lot of publishers send me offers to publish, and so I talked to Paige. I talked to one of people who they sent me, I think, an example of somebody who published for them, and I said, well, I want to talk to them. And so then they gave me the phone number of this woman who published with Paige, and she had a lot of good things to say. And I started out with another publishing company before Paige, and then they didn't live up to their contract. They wanted to start charging me for things that were supposed to be in their contract. So I broke off the agreement with them and went with Paige.
You talk about how, the guts it took for Bush to basically ignore his party. They were furious with him after he made this promise. But for people who are listening, who have no idea what we're talking about, it was an economic recovery initiated by the 1990 budget agreement.
Yeah, about the 1990 budget agreement, right.
Which we still, all these years later, are benefiting from that.
Yeah. In several ways, they put, in the budget, you want to introduce a new spending bill, you had to find something to take out to equalize the budget process, and so that you couldn't continue to build the budget. There was sequester that was in there that the government would have been shut down if it hadn't been for Bush, because of the government's going to run out of money, and they put sequester in there that if the government didn't have the money, the government would be shut down. And so this affects every budget in the future. And like, I was interviewed on live radio shows about this book at the time that we did the limited edition, the ones that Bush signed, and people were calling me. Some guy called up, it was a talk show, and called up and accused me of being some liberal Stanford professor, which I wasn't, And then President Bush and he went to China, and he was the first ambassador to China. He wasn't really an ambassador. They didn't use that term then, but that was the role that he gave.
Right.
And so he was very popular in China. So he went back to China and held a conference on U.S.-Chinese relations. And we did a copy of the book there in China. One page is in Chinese, and the other page is in English.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about U.S.-Chinese relations. Texas A&M went back there and was the sponsor of the conference. And the Chinese government had to approve the issuing of the book. They approved the issue of every book that's published. You can't publish a book in China unless the government approves it.
Okay.
And so on April 23rd, Bush was discussing whether he should go against the economy was going bad. He was discussing with John Sununu whether he should go against his Read My Lips, No New Taxes pledge. And Sununu said, well, there's been a lot of great one-term presidents. And Bush said, yeah, but he says, I got to do the right thing for good governance. And so he did it. And when he did it, he knew that it would probably make him a one-term president. It was very painful for him. When he ran for re-election, I was at the convention in Houston for his renomination. He kind of apologized for making the decision that he did. At the same time, in his heart, he knew it was the best thing for the country. And that took real courage and real political leadership. And that's one of the things that really inspired me is people needed to know the type of political courage it took to make that decision, and that it wasn't a self-motivated decision. It was one for love of country. And that's why it's such a great act of political leadership. And that's what really motivated me to do the book. And just like with Ford, I told him that this is going to be the thing that you're going to be noted for the most in your presidency. And it is, and people have recognized it years down the road as a great act of presidential leadership. So in the book, Ford participated in this book as well. I put about Ford's pardoning of Nixon in there as a similar act of leadership. And so they've got two presidents who've actually participated in this book. And I got the Thomas Jefferson story in there and so forth. So people can gain a feeling of this.
Daniel Ostrander, Read My Lips, No New Taxes. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you. I enjoyed talking to you, Alice.
A U.S. Marine for 14 years and a sniper, Robert Jake Funston, ended up in law enforcement for almost 3 decades. He retired after he was hit by a stolen vehicle on the job, and now he shares his experiences through fictional characters in his book entitled The Cross, One Shot, One Kill.
If you want a funny story, I'll tell you a funny story. How about that? About the writing.
Okay.
Okay, so I actually started writing in about 2010 or so, and that's where I really got into it. And I used to write my wife love letters and stuff and put them in her bag to go to lunch with. We worked at the same department. She worked in the evidence department. I worked in the patrol. And one day she decided she's going to start letting the girls in her office read my notes because she really was impressed with them. And everybody said, oh, my God, you need to let him, put it in book form. So I started doing a book form on that. And I actually came up with one. I haven't put it out yet, but it's coming. But during that process, I started, things would pop in my mind and I would start typing. And just things, from my past history and stuff like that. And it took off.
Did these thoughts lead to The Cross, One Shot, One Kill?
There's parts in there that if you know me, you'll know who I'm talking about, and I usually don't spread it out. I was a scout sniper for about 5 years, and I went to a bunch of different places, and I try not to discuss that too much anymore. But it was interesting. It was a good time, but that's where a lot of it came from, I think, and then just from my imagination.
Is The Cross your imagination, or was that something that you did, that you really did leave a cross with a strip of leather on your victims, which is so dramatic?
Yeah, there's parts of reality and parts of add-ons, I guess I could say. And I looked at it and thought, what would I do? What did I do? And that is something that snipers do, and actually they've done it in a couple of different wars, but they leave it as mainly a momentum for the bad guys to see that and say, oh, we don't want to be here anymore. And it scares the hell out of them, to be blunt with you, because they know there's a sniper around.
I think it's interesting, like you described the moments before you actually pull a trigger, a trickle of sweat on your brow, senses. I mean, it's very descriptive and scary, but, it makes me wonder, like, how are you able to live with yourself? I mean, it's your job, right?
It is. Yeah, it is. It definitely is. And I don't think anybody, especially in that category, the snipers, I don't think they really get rid of it all. And as far as all the other people in the military, it's the same thing, where that's where you get post-traumatic stress and everything. But a lot of the scout snipers don't go into a lot of their details.
Yeah.
With other people they don't know, they don't, trust, I guess. And that's a big thing with them. And it's more of a personal thing. It really is. It's, if you can handle it, you can handle it, and you find that out. But as my wife will tell you, I still have little shadows in the night, and it's been a long, long time. And yeah, they're gonna be with me for the rest of my life.
But, then you leave Vietnam and you say, your new war is 8,000 miles from Vietnam. And from reading your synopsis, I was like, the guy must have become a cop, right? Because he must have. And you were a cop?
Colorado Springs for about 14 and a half years. And I got offered, a friend of mine, a real good friend of mine, we've been friends since the 90s, early 90s. He got hired up in Washington State in a place called Snohomish County. It's just north of Seattle. And we stayed in touch when he got hired there. And he said, man, Jake, you need to take a look at this. This is a great department. So I liked what I saw. They hired me, and the rest is history. I spent another 14 years doing the stuff, and that's where I met my wife, and I loved it. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
Did you have to deal with some unsavory characters in that role as well?
Yeah, I'm not going to discuss that one, though. We'll leave that one alone for now. Maybe another day.
So, do you discuss in your book?
Well, yes, to be honest then. Okay.
What did you use for the basis of this book?
I've worked with, and I guess it hurts their feelings, I would call them, but they're dirtbags. And I was a detective for about 5 years in crimes against children and sexual assaults. And we saw the disgusting people out there that were doing that stuff. And there's times where, every cop that does this, and even people in their own household, are going, it would have just been better if you put a bullet in them. And it's the truth, because they're not getting the justice that they deserve. They've got attorneys with their, like I put in the book, their $300 and $400 suits, and that was back in the 70s, of course. But they're getting them out of these things, and they're going to do it again and again and again. So the cross, that's where he came up with it, and he wanted to stop it. He wanted to get, the crime down and help the victims. And that's what cops do, basically. They help the victims as much as they can and get the criminals off the street.
The character in your book, what is his name?
Everybody that's read my book so far has not been able to figure out who the shooter is until like the last 3 chapters.
Okay.
And
but he also leaves the cross on his victims.
Yeah, he does, and that's his little present, his going away present for them, and to let the people know, the little dirtbags know that there's somebody out there. And as you progress through the book, you'll see that he starts picking up his pace some, and there's a couple different reasons for it in there.
And then at the very end, the name is revealed.
Yes, and
will you continue writing?
As long as I can, yeah. I've actually got a sequel to The Cross that I'm working on. I'm about 110 pages into it, and it's going to take you or anybody else into a whole new direction with them. And I think I've learned a lot with the first one, and I've never had any official writing courses or anything like that. I just did it on my own. And I think that's really, really helped. And when the people see what happens in the second book, they're going to go, wow. They're going to love it. It's some really intense missions that he goes into. And one last thing I'd like to bring up, if I could.
Go ahead.
You asked about when I started writing, but what I have written is that I've got different genres that I go through, and the one with my wife, with the story with her, the whole love stories in the book, I turned it into a book that's kind of interesting. It goes for 1,000 years, and it's a man and a woman that meet from way back when, older than me, and they get together, they fall in love, and one of them dies, and it's too soon. So you travel through time, and all of a sudden you meet that person again in your next relationship and the next battles that you fight. And it's in my mind, it's a really good love story. The way it's written, and what's happening in their lives when they meet and when they're alone and stuff like that. And then the other one that I did that I've got, probably close to 100 pages into it now, is a book of short story horror stories. And I've got a mind. If you'll see one of these days, maybe I'll have it out there too, but it's all horror stories, and it talks about the mind, and then it goes into all the different stories and stuff. But it's pretty interesting too. It's a real vivid depiction, I guess, of the brain and how it works and how it fools you and doesn't fool you. So that's the other area that I really like writing in. And like I said, I hope I can finish everything and get it out there, just to say, yep, hey, look at this. I finally did it. I did it, on my own, with my own little brain, and this is what happened. So anybody can do it. All they can do is try and use their head when they do it. And that's all I have to say.
You go, Robert. Robert Jake Funston, The Cross.
That's correct.
One shot.
Yep.
One kill.
Correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and you have a great day, okay?
A former technology leader for a Wisconsin school district, Carrie Paine, is spending her retirement going through old writings, and some of them are being reworked and published, including Buff is Overstuffed.
My first book was written when I was in college. I worked at a Miller Electric, which is a company that makes welders. I worked there for them for 13 years, and I went back to school when I was 29 to become an educator. At that time, I had 2 young sons, and my youngest was born a very large child. He was 10 pounds at birth, and he was just a big bear. And so we had lost him 2 years ago.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, he had it was called the Widowmaker. The heart exploded, and so it was something that nobody could have told that it was going to happen. So with that, I was writing with the Barefoot Writers when I retired from teaching.
Who are the Barefoot Writers?
Barefoot Writers is a association that you can get into, that they actually are the middle person, that people that get work for you, writing jobs. And so it's like a group. And I did a lot of research for different blogs. I really enjoyed that because you really learn so much.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a competition going on for writers to enter a piece into the competition. Well, I thought, okay, I'm going to dig Buff out of the closet or the drawer and send it in. I had 2 different publishers contact me asking me to publish through them. And I decided to go with Fulton Publishing, which has been a very nice experience so far for me. So,
When did you write Buff is Overstuffed?
Buff was Overstuffed was written back in 1996. I had sent it to several places back then, as trying to get it published, but I kept getting declines. I guess the message wasn't needed back in 96.
I don't know. Well, what is the message? Tell me about your book. How does the story go?
Oh my gosh. My message is about a very young, large bear cub that's so excited about school. He loves books. He loves reading. He loved school. But what he loved more was the chance of meeting more people, or more critters, as I call them. Friends. We use the word friends and critters. When he got to school, the other critters or friends wouldn't have anything to do with him. They were afraid of him because he was so large. He even went and sat on the friendship bench, and nobody. And so when he got home that night, he was very upset, and his mother said, "It's going to be okay, Buff. It'll be all right." And she gave Professor Bullfrog a phone call, and he said, "Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right." And the next day, he told the children about the golden rule. And he explained life as everything is different, and acceptance, and celebrating the differences. And then he had them all become friends with each other, because they are now a school family. And Buff goes home and tells his mom, everything's going to be all right.
Oh.
This is book number 1 out of 8.
8 books?
8 books, but I'm trying to roll them out once a year to once every 8 months or so.
Are these 8 books already written?
I have 6 of them are written, and I have 2 of them that are in outline format.
So you were writing these books as you were going through your career and being a mom, and just writing them along the way?
Right.
Oh, geez.
Working with children of all different ages, seeing the same actions from different children. It all has to do with their mentality at different age levels. And different things that our parents spoke to us about that may not be heard in the home. So in the books, there's going to be a page, a parent's page, that can go through and ask some questions as they're reading. So they can look it over ahead of time, because it's supposed to be really meant for an interaction book with the younger children.
Right.
By the time they get to be 2nd, 3rd grade, they should be able to read it fine on their own.
Yeah.
But it is taking the time to have that friendly interaction. Like,
Right.
Oh, I feel bad for Buff. How do you feel for Buff?
Yeah.
And have those conversations. As a child, I remember my mother saying, I don't like how that child over there is acting, because, and then she would tell us. So that would be a positive reinforcement telling us, don't ever act that way.
Right, right.
So it's having those conversations that some parents may not have the time to do anymore,
Yeah.
but by reading a book before bed or finding a special time to have that book with each other, it just makes it a little easier. And then having different questions already written out that they don't have to quick come up with
Yeah.
might help also.
Are you still connected with the school that you were involved with?
I have a great relationship with both school districts I worked with. And because of the position I was in earlier, I have worked with many different school districts, helping them out with their technology and their students. And
What about your books?
right now I had through the Appleton Historic Society, they invited me to do a book reading and signing. And I had my retired teachers show up. I have a list of kindergarten or 4K to second grade to come and read the book to the schools, to those students. So I have actually a sign up page now where they can sign up and get on the calendar because there's so many, I can only be at so many different places. And so I have through my network of teachers, there's a lot of them that are just hammering to get to it. I have the Appleton Library that's going to is opening up soon, the new one. And it's going to be in their children's section. I'm going to be one of the first guests that they have. They're going to have a monthly guest that'll come and join the students. We are also at the Historic Society going to have a little writer workshop with myself and my illustrator. And they're all excited about that. It's free for children. We only have 30 spots, but they will be writing their own book and illustrating their own book.
Carrie, this is great. You are proving to all of the authors that are listening how you can get the word out about your book.
Right.
These are some of the things you can do. Now, you're lucky you're connected to a school district. Not everybody's connected to a school district, but you're basically working through the people you know, the people that you've worked with.
You might want to mention Buff will have his own web page.
Okay.
And there's going to be activities on there for the students to go and visit him and then see about what books are coming up.
Great. Buff is overstuffed. Thank you, Carrie Paine.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I really am excited about this time with you and being able to talk about my Buff.
An education director at an early childhood center, Nicholas Moyer knows kids. So no surprise, he's written a children's book. It's entitled The Friendly Little Tugboat. And it was inspired by your dad, right?
My father passed away a few years ago, but he was also an avid reader. He had a few poetry books published, and he really loved it. So I decided to create one in his honor, one that also sort of spoke about some of the issues that I had faced as a child. And there is a meaning behind the book that teaches, understanding self-worth, perseverance, the importance of friends, and, hope. So having experienced a lot of bullying when I was growing up, this was something I felt was needed at this point.
So tell me the story.
He did not have a side light, and boats in the shipyard would always make fun of him. He felt ostracized, but he felt that there's something better outside. So one day he got up, decided to leave the shipyard. The other boats didn't really appreciate it. They were laughing at him. They were not letting him really feel like he could succeed. So he left because he was an adventurer, sort of like myself. And then after he left, he explored, but at one point ran into a motorboat. And all the boats in the story are my friends from college. So that's all the names of the boats in the story. But he spoke with the motorboat, and the motorboat had two motors, which is an important part of understanding the meaning behind the story. So they raced to what he said was the coconut tree, and they raced across the water towards the island. Nikos, the main character, was keeping up with the motorboat, and the motorboat was so excited. Oh man, he's so quick. But Nikos ran into jagged rock, and his motor was broken. So at that point, the motorboat, Tony, drove back with him to the shipyard. Nikos obviously was made fun of again. He had no motor this time and no side light, felt very ostracized once again. And then towards the end of the story, he saw his friends, the motorboat, come and give one of his motors to Nikos so that his boat worked again. And Nikos sort of learned, well, there's more than just exploring, there's friendship.
That's so sweet.
And yeah, I really liked it because, I felt ostracized as a child. So,
Aw, is that something you still deal with?
no, not anymore. At this point, I feel, I've established who my real friends are and who are not, and stop trying to befriend every single person and understand what true friendship really is.
Yeah, and it's okay if people don't like you. It's okay.
Right, exactly.
You got to find a way to keep tugging along, baby. So your friendly little tugboat, you work with all these kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to get your book in? Can you go read your book to these kids?
I can. I put a copy of my book in my school.
Okay.
The class enjoys it.
Great. Maybe the parents will enjoy it too and buy a copy.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you, Nicholas Moyer, author of The Friendly Little Tugboat.
No problem. You're welcome.
From digital media at a pharmaceutical company to author in retirement. Writing a book is something Leslie Donald Porter always wanted to do, and now he's published a high fantasy novel. It's entitled Woodspun. So the story, it's been developing a while, right?
I always had a very vivid imagination as a kid, and so really I always think of it as, it's something that I've kind of been working on for a life, for my whole life, but it's just always been something going on in the back of my mind. And like I would sketch characters and think out like who they were and what their motivations were, and over time I sort of developed all these ideas that were just sort of churning around in my head or in little notes or drawings and things that I had done. And then like I said, once I was looking at the prospect of retiring and I was thinking about how I wanted to spend my time, I thought, well, it's a great opportunity for me to, finally put all these ideas together into a story.
So tell me the story about these two sisters that were left in the woods. Kind of scary.
So Woodspun is the first book in the series that I'm writing, which is titled The Moons of Druinden. And in the world, it includes magical races and creatures, as well as sort of like common mortals and other animals. And then the whole world is ruled by 6 moon gods, and each of the gods governs a particular sphere of influence. So in the first novel, I provide the backstory that explains how all but one of those gods became enslaved to the mortal races, who then misused that power as a weapon against their enemies and against each other. And when that happened, which is sort of like takes place in the far past, the sorcerers or magic users at that time used their magic to create a promise or a seed that would allow for a group of champions to come forth in the future, and they would be called the foundlings. And ultimately, the hope was that they would bring order and healing to this world that had been thrown into chaos. And so Woodspun takes place at the time when this promise is about to reveal itself. So it's all about like who are the foundlings and and obviously there are characters who support them and protect them and help them to achieve their goals, while there are others who want to find them and destroy them, and because they don't want them to change the way things are. And the first book, Woodspun, basically takes place in the location of two different forests. The first one is called Verdu Bardu, which is a place of lush growth and light, and it's basically cut off from all civilization. So there's an idyllic kind of town there called Hearthwood, and there an old wise woman, Adelia, lives with her two adopted daughters, Tamali and Sasha. And so the sort of story gets going when those two young women encounter a stranger in the woods who bring both a prophecy to them and a dire warning of a threat to their community. And then how they meet those challenges is the basis of their part of the story. And then there's another forest called Bereft Bardu, which is a place of death and darkness. And no one really knows what lies deep within the forest because nobody's been able to penetrate it, but anything that comes out of it is usually terrifying and destructive. And so the other main characters in the story are two, what I call soul sorcerers, who are two male wizards who are bound by their love and for each other, and that strengthens their power. And they've come to this dark forest to investigate. And their names are Santor and Treller. And eventually, what they learn sheds light on the threat that is happening in Hearthwood, also a threat to the greater world of Druiden. And so, like many fantasy epics, I think at its core, my story is about the characters and their relationships. It's a tale of courage, self-discovery, sacrifice, and love.
Well said. You wrapped that up really nicely.
Thank you.
But I want to know, where do you leave us at the end of this book?
So the first book is really about what sets everything in motion. And there's a big crisis happening in these two different forests. And that initial part of the story does resolve itself, but then it sort of sets up all the characters, to move on to the next stage of their evolution and development. And so the second book that is I'm already working on, going to introduce, is going to continue the story with the characters that were introduced in Woodspun, but it will also introduce new characters. And essentially through the series, these foundlings or champions who are progressively revealing themselves in the world will all be introduced, and ultimately it will all build towards a final climax, climactic sort of battle between good and evil.
Okay. How many books in all?
So I don't know precisely yet exactly how many books it's going to be, but when I started writing this, I wrote a long first draft, and then when I went back and started doing rewriting and editing it, it quickly became far too large to be a single novel. And at that time, that sort of first draft was broken into 4 sections. And in the course of my rewriting and editing, sort of the first section ended up becoming the novel Woodspun. And so I believe that I have at least 4 novels for the series based upon what I currently have in terms of content, but it's still developing. As I write, I come up with additional ideas, or I sometimes I change the direction of the story based upon other thoughts that I have, and so it may end up being more books than that, but I think it's definitely going to be at least 4 in total.
Maybe I'll talk to you when you get that second book done. All right. Leslie Donald Porter, Woodspun. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
A love of zombies, his wife's cancer battle, COVID, a life-changing event leading up to a stint behind bars, all played a role in German Lobaton's efforts to write and publish his book, The Escape. German, let's start with the zombie.
Well, I've always wanted to write a zombie book because I was a fan back in the 80s of, Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, that kind of stuff. So it's like, wow, you know what? I can do a better storyline than that.
Okay.
Plus, my story is just kind of, I guess, complex because my second wife, she had developed cancer, and it was a new kind of cancer that they were trying to establish, and none of it was covered under the insurance. So everything was out of pocket, and I was working a whole bunch of hours. I ended up working 3 full-time jobs, 120 hours a week, and when I couldn't make ends meet, I finally decided that necessity knows no law, and I committed a crime. Was promptly convicted because I'm not a criminal.
What did you do?
I committed a burglary to help pay for her medicines. So I did 11 and a half years in prison, and that's where I wrote my book because I had all this free time.
And your wife? How did that go?
Well, she went into remission, and she called me a liar and a thief and never wanted to talk to me again. So we got divorced like just a little over 2 years ago, going on 3 years now.
How did you feel about that?
There's a saying that I kind of go by. In the end, only 3 things matter: how greatly you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you gave up things not meant for you. She was the third one. So, I'm happy that she survived her cancer, and she didn't want to be with me. That's fine. We go our separate ways, and I'm not angry with her. I have no ill will towards her, and God is always watching over me. I mean, my time in prison should have been fairly horrible. I got sent to Attica as my first prison, and I was protected throughout my entire time. I did very well. I wrote a book. I wrote a couple of manuscripts that I'm in the process of editing and making it publish worthy, I guess.
Tell me about this book.
Okay, this book is kind of interesting because on the surface, it's about a zombie apocalypse, but it's much more than that. It's about second chances. It's about being able to go out there and utilize your skills to help other people, because ultimately that's what it is. In order to survive any kind of apocalypse, whether it's zombies or nuclear war, whatever, it's people helping each other that will get us through. And I think everybody tends to think, all right, you know what, this has happened, and it's every man for himself, and that's not the right mentality, because everybody brings a certain skill set. I may do carpentry, you may do plumbing, somebody else does electricity, and together, we get a place all set up.
So tell me about Hunter Wolf.
He's actually kind of funny because my character is all based on the dogs that I had prior to going to prison.
Okay.
Hunter Wolf is my chocolate lab.
Like you, he ended up serving time for a crime he committed while trying to save his wife.
Right. And like I said before, it's about second chances. He's doing okay in prison, and he kind of falls for this correctional officer, female correctional officer that he saves. He rescues her, and she's of the mindset that anybody who's wearing state greens is a criminal. So it's that process of changing her mindset and saying, hey, you know what, this guy really is okay. And she ends up falling in love with him.
And then COVID hits?
Right. There's something that goes wrong with the vaccine. And on top of the virus, it mutates the vaccine so that they become zombie-like. And, within the gated community, you would think that you're fairly safe, but you're actually trapped. So, the zombies end up entering into the prison system, and they start killing everybody there. So it's the title of the book, The Escape. He's trying to escape. But the way the prison system works is that if you're sick, you can still come into work. So all these people who are sick but not sick enough to just kind of die at that moment in time go into the prison, and then they convert while inside the prison. And then they start attacking everybody.
And nobody can stop them?
No, because only the other guards have weapons. The inmates don't really have weapons, so they're like the first prey. And then once you attack one attacks two attack four, and it just progresses where the entire prison is just zombified.
And these zombies can't find a way to break out?
No, because everything is locked down. What a lot of correctional officers don't understand is that when something happens in the prison, if you're lucky, you make it to the outside of the gate, and then everything shuts down. But if you're not out in time, you get shut in with all the prisoners. So if they're rioting, you're going to get hurt or killed. So the people who didn't get infected and the administration, they locked down the entire prison. But since this was ongoing on the outside world, they just abandoned the prison. So the prison was just left isolated. So everybody had to fend for themselves.
So he didn't get COVID, he didn't get bitten, and he is like the only sane one in a sea of zombies.
Not necessarily. There were a couple of others that tried to escape as well, but they didn't quite make it. So he ends up escaping with the female correctional officer.
Oh.
And they steal a car, and then they find a house, and they get clothing and stuff so that way they can survive. And they were going to actually head south, but they encounter this other guy who happens to be somebody who I associated with in prison. I used him as a character also. And he ends up owning an abandoned airport up in Maine. So it's almost perfect because it's got a fence all the way around. It's got buildings. So they head up to Maine, and that's where they establish their community. And then they go out on rescue missions and all kinds of little things that keep the book moving along.
How are you telling people about this book?
Well, I have a Facebook page, and my publishers are phenomenal. They did a little video, and they're just pushing it along. It's on a couple of different platforms, and I have a friend of mine who promotes the book on his webpage. Okay. And I talk about it on my Facebook page.
Are you going to keep writing?
Yes, I have the second book in the works. I'm kind of excited about that, and it's based on the first story. But it's kind of, each book is going to be standalone. So if you start on book number 2, you can just read through that because it gives kind of a synopsis of what's going on to bring you up to date, and then it just follows through.
Okay.
The first book is also kind of standalone. Like, it ends in a way that you say, wow, you know what? Maybe the second book will come out, or maybe not, but it leaves you kind of satisfied at the end, because some books end and you say, wow, you know what? I'm frustrated because I don't know really what happened.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I hate that. All right, German Lobaton, author of The Escape. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore. We're in